Good morning. Happy winter. I'm in my backyard, and you can see that there is ice everywhere. It's going to be a long, cold winter. I want to talk to you a little bit about the word conservative and liberal. These are cited as two political poles, not just in America, but in many parts of the world. What I find deceptive about those terms is that consistently one group tends to represent more strongly the voices of large business owners, and the other tends to represent workers and different discursive groups of people. And in a democracy, while we acknowledge that it's important that we have a plethora of kinds of voices, polarizing those two really tends to pit them against one another, when in fact, if we look at it, the reality is one can't work without the other. So we should be more be about coalition building, and I think that's something here in Europe that is also it's the basis of the government, is building coalitions. And Germany is a very strong example, but UK is not bad either. The problem I see, and why I say that they're false, it's a false dichotomy, is because as I said, they have to work together. Business can't work without workers. Workers can't work without business. But it says that they don't. It almost says that they don't have common goals. And in America, because we have the two-party system, it becomes a quite extreme example of what I'm talking about. There are many things that conservatives and liberals would agree upon, both socially and economically. And yet when they have to say, okay, so now I want to just represent my interest, then that's when the selfishness comes in. That's when the, us and them, me versus them. And you start pitting and picking apart, the character sort of assassinations of each party. And so you start to get people to line up behind very narrow party views. And you see this in the United States with the Conservative Party in particular, because, the conservative Christian rhetoric, it almost says that there is no liberal form of those very same religions. And so, the fact that the Conservative Party has hijacked, in many places, has hijacked a conservative religious view, and this is expressed, you see it most commonly in gay rights, and rights over women's bodies. They become, it's when the religious leaders stand up, and then the Conservative Party leaders line up behind them. And it's as if liberals don't have anything to say about it, because our arguments are just reason and rhetoric, and not that we could have any beliefs. For example, that also say that religious liberalism is what God is asking. So that's why it becomes false, because it almost drives us to see religion in one narrow way. Again, creating a wedge between parties that should and could work together. And I find it particularly peculiar in America that you have conservatism linked to linking Christianity, conservative Christianity, with conservative economics. The only consistency in conservative economics and conservative Christianity is the word conservative. And look at it, they mean two radically different things in those contexts. Conservative Christianity does not necessarily imply reducing spending on the poor. I think Catholicism itself, as an institution, demonstrates that, with Catholicism, the Catholic Church being, if I'm not mistaken, still the largest healthcare provider in the United States. Still the large, operating the soup kitchens, operating, different kinds of interventions to help poor people. So I think religiously, you can say that the Catholic Church has a big focus on eliminating the ramifications of poverty. And yet, so then you think, okay, so is it a Protestant thing? And there are some patterns about that. I mean, you look at countries that are more Catholic, or even regions in countries. For example, if you look at more Catholic-leaning France and Italy versus a Germany which is a patchwork, and so you can even see like in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is more Catholic, you have more social spending versus in other states, and so perhaps there is something there between Catholicism and Protestantism that needs to be teased out because the evolution of conservative economics to come to represent God's work is not the whole truth, but B, again, it just wedges us to believe in this idea of them versus us, and we will never work together. And so then you end up getting, as this election just showed, a conservative group that is based on whiteness, and it becomes they become the stereotype of whiteness. And I think a lot of white people are pressured into seeing their identity as represented by them, mirrored in them. It becomes a stereotype in the very way that we talk about how minority groups are stereotyped, and becomes the idea of our dominant idea of who we are, and therefore we have to respond to that or fit into that. And that's the struggle we see in adolescence. Do you not become the thug, or do you just embrace it and because it's the only way that you know how to access power in this culture? And I think that white conservatism does the same thing for white people. It says that this is what white is, and that other group is just, immigrants and blacks and, poor people who you don't want to be anyway. We're the group that you aspire to be. And they create that aspirational image of a dominant, a powerful person that becomes the Superman, the superhero, and that's what Mitt Romney tried to be. And it hijacks Christianity in a very eerie way for me, because it looks at Jesus as this martyr, this leader who goes forward and becomes Superman. It becomes that kind of that mythology that we read over and over into every situation, and it dictates how we respond to, for example, taking care of one another, how we respond to dealing with people whose lives are very different from our own, or even perceiving that their lives are as valid as ours. And you see that in politics, that's always the heart of it, is, does this politician even address me? Does this politician see my life and how different my life is from his or hers, Or do I just aspire to be like that person, and therefore I put them in power? That's what we've traditionally done. We've, put the guy, we want to be the rich guy who's powerful, and we want that kind of life, and that's, what we worship in our movies, and that's what we project on through our media, that even here in England they call it the BBC voice. We project class and those our aspirations everywhere, and so they become this mirror for us, and it becomes very dangerous, I think, to sort of bifurcate, conservatism and liberalism, because it really distances us, as stereotypes do, from our authentic selves. Many people become very confused about who they are, because the stereotypes about them almost become the dominant voice that they have, the dominant images that they have, unless they go about creating their own. We talk about gender and body dysmorphia, that the effects of the fashion industry on young girls' body image. Well, it's that real along the lines of race as well, along the lines of class. And when you project an illogical, irrational sort of icon of power into politics, into fashion, then it very much, sorry, it's a cat just startled me, it very much breeds, a very narrow, very divided politics in the nation. And we've got to rethink our labels. We've got to, it's not just thinking, in terms of multiple parties. I don't think that there are some benefits of just a dual party versus a coalition building in democracy, what we have in Europe versus what we have in America. Not even talking about that, but even just that there are more kinds of voices, and that those voices are in dialogue, not just that we have a shouting match. We can all come to be who we are, and not just conservative or liberal.